Black people all over the world are suffering and dying too soon from illnesses that have plagued our communities for centuries. At IndyGeneUS Health, we are on a mission to build the most valuable and genetically diverse data bank on the planet. Although people with African ancestry make up more than 20% of the global population, our genetic data is less than 3% of the data used in drug discovery. We are frustrated by the status quo and are determined to make a difference by becoming the change we want to see. We know you have lots of questions, and we're excited to answer those questions. You will also receive a free personalized health assessment. Join our community today at biusforall.com. All right. Hello and welcome. We are live with our founders. Hi, everyone. My name is Madia Logan. I'm the Chief Member Officer for IndyGeneUS Health. I'm here with Dr. Bradford Wilson, who is our Chief Scientific Officer, and Yusuf Henriquez, our CEO. We did some quick introductions last week, but I'll just ask the gentlemen to go around, do some introductory comments and some welcome comments. Pass the ball first to our CEO, Yusuf.
Oh, good afternoon. Yusuf Henriquez, founder and CEO of IndyGeneUS Health. Pleasure to be here today. Background, prior military, born and raised in the islands, Jamaica. Spent a lot of time here in Miami, Florida, before I joined the military as a combat medic straight out of high school. Been in healthcare for over 25 years. We have looked at medical health, government healthcare systems, and also did device and drug approvals at the Food and Drug Administration. Last government position was overseeing mental health, PTSD, biomarker research with the Department of Veteran Affairs. Over the last 4 years, just been looking at hacking healthcare systems and structural racism within healthcare, especially in the minority, Black and Brown, Indigenous population. Pleasure to meet you guys.
Thank you. Dr. Wilson?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Dr. Brad Wilson. I'm a geneticist by training, native New Yorker, also fellow Howard University alum. I was in DC area for about 25 years and now residing in Charlotte, North Carolina. My research background is in health disparities, looking at cancer disparities, particularly looking at prostate cancer and breast cancer, and also did some work in an area of genetics called pharmacogenetics, which is involved in how you metabolize drugs and respond to drugs, the genetics of that. And also did some work with a company, actually was one of the team members that Yusuf took out to California about 5 years ago to do the work he mentioned on genetic tests for predisposition to PTSD and anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder. And then subsequently after that, I actually did some work with a company that works in the maternal and reproductive health space. And then most recently with the IndyGeneUS team. Pleasure to meet everyone.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. So Yusuf, before we jump into our topic, which is maternal mortality, and I'm excited to talk with you all about this. And if you all have questions, please start to share them in the chat, and we will get to as many as we can. I'm happy to have the conversation and this discussion about maternal mortality. Before we jump into that, Yusuf, are there any updates just from a company perspective for Bias for All or IndyGeneUS Health that you'd like to share with the broader audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thrilled, and as we continue to build our user membership base, I think we wanted to highlight that as we've mentioned, we are developing a app that'll be able to be downloaded and a web application for our members in order to get that personal risk assessment that we've been highlighting. And so excited to kind of express some of the developments around this, and we're very close to being able to deploy what we believe is our first minimum viable product, which is the Genius platform. And so, as you start to see here, we're considering a lot of the different areas that are essential to start identifying, risk factors around individuals' personalized health. And so, what we're doing is we're working through some of the privacy and security, which is at the utmost front of the company's mission. And so, while we're a little bit delayed with that, with the application being able for use by our members, we do believe that making sure that their privacy and security behind it, and the integrity of making sure that information that's shared with us is protected, is the utmost importance to the members and to our community. So super excited to have to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and having that being able to be provided to our members to start that personalized health risk assessment. And then, of course, other news, we are closing out on our first round of funding. We've had tremendous, support from our communities, not just large traditional VC members, but also angel investors, which, shows that, we are providing some level of, support, and we are getting support from communities that believe that this is much needed.
Yeah.
And so, while, we are taking large check size, it's also important that we have individuals in the community that's also writing small checks. But again, I think it's the value of showing that individuals do believe that this is something that would be beneficial to both them and their families. And then we have some large partnerships that are in the works. We haven't been, we're not going to release them today, but exciting couple of calls today, especially from large corporations that have seen, what we've been able to do with such a short period of time. It's technically only been 2 months since we launched Bias for All on October 5th. So now we're up on 60 days. And so great traction, great response from community and from, investors and large corporations that wants to be engaged and be involved in our movement. And so in the next couple of weeks, you'll start to see some major announcement around large, institutions that are coming on board to join us on our movement and support our Bias for All movement.
Yeah, that is great. That's great. Thank you so much for those updates. Now, I'll just kick off the topic at hand. So, maternal mortality. We have such a it's such a heavy topic, and I don't have all of the scientific knowledge, but as a mother, and a Black woman, I knew what those statistics were, and I found them to be really intimidating when I realized that I was pregnant and that I was going to go through that process. And we shared a statistic on our LinkedIn page last week. As a part of our content series on Friday, we share a hard truth. And typically it is a statistic about, a particular health disparity or an area. And what we shared last week was pretty staggering. And it was that Black mothers are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than their white counterparts. And that was just a staggering figure for me to kind of think about as a mother. And so, Dr. Wilson, can you just give us a little bit of context to that, and if you could explain a little bit about why and how that particular health disparity exists?
Sure, no problem. But before we jump in, I just wanted to kind of point out this is one of the, when we talk about health disparities, there are others that usually come to mind and that usually are the topic of conversation. and more so ones that are, really driving the disproportionate, unfortunate mortality rates uh, as a result of exposure to, the COVID-19 pandemic, unfortunately, right? Talking about more chronic things such as, diabetes and cardiovascular disease like hypertension or heart disease, and the things that happen downstream of that, things like kidney failure, which is unfortunate, and what's also a result of chronic diabetes and chronic hypertension and like limb amputations and things of that nature. And unfortunately, there are some other things that happen downstream of that as well, more commonly in African Americans as a result of these chronic diseases, right? But maternal mortality is another disparity that exists, that's a little less talked about. Women's health in general, topic of discussion that's generally less talked about. And this is kind of a reflection of what we see in terms of what we've seen historically in terms of like clinical trials, right? Clinical trials, as Yusuf will be the first to mention, there are been 95 or 99% of this vast majority, just European males in the clinical trials,
Right.
right? In terms of Yusuf has lots of experience from the FDA with that, in terms of what you see there. But similarly, when we talk about women's health in general, it's kind of less talked about. So that's just one thing just wanted to say, that these things don't get the light that other health disparities do. Although, as you mentioned, the disparity is really huge, right? Four
Right.
times the rate that's like nothing to sneeze at. I mean, if it was twice the rate, we're talking about twice the death rate from COVID, and that's a huge thing. So this is twice that in terms of
Right.
the rate. So that's it's just a little mind-boggling to think about that type of a disparity, right? That type of a difference. And in terms of why, there's probably lots of reasons, right? Lots of reasons why, if you could potentially look at in terms of potential contributors. We talk about access to healthcare, first and foremost. When you talk about insurance, whether you have insurance, whether employed or how a lot of folks, a lot of African American folks, a lot of Black folks are what we call underinsured, which means have very little bit of insurance coverage, if any, or completely uninsured whatsoever and don't have any insurance. Now a lot of folks like that. There are plenty of folks who do have insurance, through their employment and what have you, but there are a lot of folks who don't. And then how do those folks get how do they get healthcare?
Right.
Most often than not, those folks are not going to see a doctor on a regular basis for like wellness visits. They may not they may not be going to see their dentist regularly for cleanings twice a year. They may not, and they're probably not even going to see a doctor unless some type of accident or something happens where they they're in some type of debilitating pain, where they're in so much pain that they can't do anything. They just have to go to the emergency room. For the most part, that's where you see a lot of people who don't have insurance. That's where they get their, healthcare, unfortunately, right? And the thing about it that's even worse is that emergency room care is the most expensive, because when you're talking about emergency room care, you're seeing things that are have gone unchecked and just have gone untreated and just are caught very late in the game, and they're so far downstream in terms of their the disease course. It's so hard to really do anything effective, and everything that you're going to try to do at that point, you're trying to do so much because it's so late stage. It's it's a really, you're really trying to play a game of catch up, and a lot of times it's a game that you can't, the best
Right.
care still can't, there's only so much that the best care can do, right?
Right.
Shout
Brad,
out to.
we got some statistics here that Alea just shared with us in the this was it just in our chat, but I wanted to read this because this is really surprising to me, and you probably knew this, but and Yusuf, feel free, Michael, feel free to jump in too, but it says that the pregnancy-related deaths per 100,000 live births for Black and American Native women was 4 to 5 times as high as it was for white women. So this is not just an issue that hits Black women or hits the Black community, because the same level is true. That same mortality ratio is true for American Native women.
Mhm.
And then it says non-Hispanic Black and non-Hispanic American Indian/Alaska Native women experienced higher rates than all other racial populations. So any thoughts there to the kind of the diversity of, it sounds like it's a problem that affects Black and brown women and indigenous folks almost equally.
Yeah, that's not surprising. I did not have that stat in my head. I didn't know,
Mhm,
wasn't aware of that specific stat, but it's not surprising. I mean,
mhm,
similarly, as you see unfortunately, with the mortality rates from COVID, it's Black, brown, and indigenous folks, or in terms of Native American folks, who
mhm,
are dying at twice the rate. Um, Actually, in terms of genetics, Native American populations were a little bit ahead of the game in terms of identification of some genetic variants that are associated with diabetes in
mhm.
some Native American populations. But in terms of these disparities in the mortality rates, maternal mortality rates, it's not surprising, unfortunately, and
Mhm.
it's often these things we see affect Black, brown, and Native American women.
Right. Right. Very interesting. Any other thoughts from Michael or Yusuf?
In 400 feet.
Let us know in 400 feet.
Sorry about that. So
No
apologies
problem.
to the room. I'm in
No
transit.
worries.
So I think one thing, to everything Brad said is absolutely correct. The one thing I'd call out is there's this disparity in the outcomes that exist even when you account for socioeconomic factors. So even for higher income, college educated Black and brown women, when they encounter the American healthcare system, these outcomes around maternal mortality are still as bad. You can see so
Mm-hmm.
many cases, and that's sort of where you sort of start asking yourself, what impact does systemic racism have on the American healthcare system or even the global healthcare system? We look, and the answer is right there in front of us. Right, when a Black mom is in the hospital, she gets less attention
In 1.5
regardless of
miles, take the
her.
Mm-hmm.
ramp on the right to US
Mm-hmm.
50 toward Washington.
No, I mean
And so
I
ultimately,
experienced it. I know
no,
what you're
no.
talking
So
about.
so I'll give you a very personal example. So my
Mm-hmm.
wife, every single time we had to go to the hospital to have one of our three daughters, I made sure that she had on her sort of vest that said she was a cardiologist, just because it was this innate fear that I had that if at least they knew she was part of the medical community and that she was
Mm-hmm.
qualified, maybe they'd pay a little bit of attention to saving her life and keeping her alive through all these births. And
Mm-hmm.
even with all of that, I still had to be a fierce advocate to make sure that every time she said she was in pain, they paid enough attention. Because
Right.
so many don't have that advocate who kind of understands how the system works and is
Yeah.
able to fight. Because that's what it takes a lot of times, is that you have to
Mm-hmm.
fight for the person who's going through the birth. You have to fight for the child that's been born. Because if that child is Black or brown, they're not looked at the same way.
Yeah.
And this is it's
In
anecdotal
one
for
half
sure,
mile,
but it's
take the
just
ramp
one thing
on the
I wanted to
right
throw in.
to
No, I don't think it's an overshare at all. I talked about I talked about how at the beginning I said, when I was pregnant and I knew the statistics, it was scary for me being pregnant, and
I was up in Seattle. I gave birth at a Swedish hospital, and there was so much that was strange and new, and it was overwhelming. And knowing those statistics and then walking into the hospital was really scary, because I had to advocate for myself, and to make sure I was, and my baby was getting the care that we wanted. So just very quickly, any closing thoughts on the topic? Yusuf, I know you haven't said much about it. Any thoughts you have?
Yeah, I think this is an area for me that's also very touching. With 4 daughters, you can see how what everything Michael said is important to make sure that maternal and infancy care in our Black and Brown communities looked at the same way. I think for me, one of the biggest thing is just the nutrition aspect of it. We've seen a lot of preterm babies being born in some of these underserved communities because the lack of resources, as was mentioned. Given the high rate of non-insured individuals, you can see where the hesitancy to go to the hospital to get routine checkup then becomes catastrophic when the individual goes in, or a Black mother goes in for urgent care, as opposed to regularly routine getting checked up on. And then food deserts, high stress are all components that put a lot of stress on mother and child, which then leads to a lot of these high numbers in mortality rate, because again, some of the social determinants of health, some of the unseen barriers to entry and structural racism that's kind of embedded in the system, kind of leads to why these rates are so high. And so I think these are some of the areas that we're trying to make sure that we address. There should be no reason why there's such a high mortality rate. Given the high level of innovation and technology we have in this country. However, as you can see, it's not distributed equitably across the board. And so, and even if it's not intentionally done, the fact that, you may have a pediatric or clinics that directly associated with infants and mothers in labor, trying to get to that hospital may take quite a feat for a Black and Brown or Indigenous individual, where for white counterparts it's just an Uber ride down the street. And so I think one of the major areas we want to start looking at is what are those barriers that are preventing mothers, especially that are childbearing, to make sure that they have the resource and the necessary things that they need in order to go through that full trimester and that full 9 months of pregnancy.
Yeah, great. 10 months is 10 months, isn't it? Isn't it 40 weeks? I always say 9 months is 10. Clearly, you've never been in labor. My labor was 18 hours, and we don't have enough time to talk about it, you guys. Well, thank you for that talk. I just want to know, and from a company perspective, I know we're pursuing partnerships with organizations that have this focus area, and I know we have four focus areas for Indigenous health. Dr. Wilson, would you mind reminding us what they are again? I remember sickle cell is one, because I'm a carrier of sickle cell. What are the other areas? I know maternal and infant health is another area. What are the other few?
Well, I wanted to make so in addition to what Yusuf was mentioning, diet and lifestyle, in addition to diet and lifestyle, in addition to access to care, and as Michael mentioned, there are still some cases in where we see some disparities. We see disparities where access is not an issue. And he mentioned he had to advocate for his wife when she was in labor with regards to her being in pain. That segues into another specific point about the clinical care, the clinicians that are taking care of these moms in the hospital, right? was actually a poll done of medical students done about 5 years ago only with regards to medical students, and about over 2/3 of them, I think like 70% of them, when surveyed, believe that Black people did experience or feel pain in the same way that white people do. That was just 5 years ago, in 2016. So these are medical doctors. Now, this generation of doctors that are finished med schools now and are out in here in the community that were surveyed for this. What did the opinions of other clinicians look like? And then lastly, I wanted to make the point that how the perceptions of these clinicians on how Black people perceive and feel pain may be significant in the care that they're receiving, and whether or not they're receiving pain medication. And then secondarily, also there is a little known piece of information regarding how your blood oxygen saturation is measured. So if you're in the hospital and if you're on say on a ventilator, like a lot of patients are who are suffering from COVID, and they want to see how much oxygen is in your blood, they put the little device on the end of your finger and it makes your finger glow red.
Yeah.
You may see it, be familiar with it that way, but that measures how much oxygen is in your blood. But what people don't know is that device can be inaccurate for Black and brown people because of melanin in our skin. And the way the red light that's used to measure your blood oxygen levels interacts with melanin, the pigment in our skin. So it can be inaccurate for up to 1 in I believe 8 or 9 Black people. So how important is that in terms of people who are in the ICU on a ventilator? If their blood oxygen isn't being measured properly and it's inaccurate, that could be, how much of a role is that playing in these, disproportionate deaths to COVID, or disproportionate deaths during labor. And then lastly, one most important thing I think about maternal mortality disparities is that they disappear when the clinicians taking care of the mom look like the patient. That's the most important thing, because those clinicians, they're looking at that patient like it could be their mom, could be their sister, it could be their aunt. And they're going to be a little less likely to, they can be more attentive to, or more inclined to do, act when a patient says that they're in pain. I'm not saying that other clinicians don't, but, just based on some of the beliefs that, about pain in our community, it wouldn't be surprised that, and then we see examples of it. Black clinicians who were in the hospital from COVID and having child and having children, both dying in the hospital. Two Black female clinicians. I can't recall their names at the moment. I should have them ready, but that was in the past 8 months that this happened. So it's something that is really happening out there. And, it's significant that Michael had the awareness to make sure that it was known that his wife was a clinician, right? And that was in all likelihood a very smart move. But why is that? Why did he have to do that, right? He shouldn't have had to do that. We should expect that everyone going into the hospital is going to get the same level of care, but sometimes not the case.
Right. Well, listen, let's call it to be continued, because I think we can continue. We're going to continue talking about this topic next week, or at least get some more comments and hopefully some questions from the crew. I will pass the ball back to Yusuf just for closing comments before we close out. Thank you all for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks for joining in with us. Thank you guys for continuing support as we move through the end of the year. As you said, working diligently on the back end to get our personalized health risk assessment out to the community so that we can start looking at some of these health disparity areas. And so looking forward to the conversation next week, follow on. And enjoy the rest of your night. And we look forward to keeping you guys to date on our progress, and stay tuned for our newsletter and new information that should be coming out via press release within the next week or two.
Woohoo. All right. Thank you all. Bye-bye.